What if Obi-Wan Kenobi trained Luke Skywalker?
Luke, this is a dangerous time for you, when you will be tempted by the dark side of the Force. I cannot interfere.
He's more machine now than man, twisted and evil. You were our only hope.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. You must learn the ways of the Force.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
What would happen if Owen and Beru weren't alive to raise Luke? What if he grew up as a Jedi youngling? And what now? Episode 2. Were these dreams of coincidence or visions from the Force? Luke himself was left pondering as he awoke from his brief period of sleep, seeking to at first meditate in the quietest corner of the Millennium Falcon. A great disturbance was what jolted him, sensed and foreseen, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror before falling silent. A sensation so stark and terrible that the student who received them was struggling with their weight. Little did this Padawan know, such waking dreams were a part of his destined bloodline, not just from his father, but also his fabled and forlorn grandmother, Shmi Skywalker. And while her own connection to the Force is never fully explained, it was implied. Tying back to the previous episode and how here in our timeline, Luke first used the Force much sooner than he did in Children of the Jedi, the life and legend of Obi-Wan Kenobi is, in my opinion, the best book to explore this time period. And again, in my opinion, this novel is single-handedly the best Obi-Wan Kenobi novel ever written. The only problem with the novel itself is how it retroactively changes or just ignores certain characters altogether. But that's what I did in the last episode, so that's fine. Even though it's basically just a combination of different novels. But I also want to clarify that originally Darth Maul's second death didn't occur until after Obi-Wan and Het first dueled on Tatooine. However, in this story, since their duel was pressed up, Darth Maul, before his second death, is still alive in this timeline. Moving on, this is why the dreams Luke saw now would feel so real. Tremors across the Force that enabled him to wake up before rattling him, followed only by several seconds of silence before the nearest doorway was filled. Having already introduced himself earlier amongst his men, the acting rebel commander, Able 1707, now sought privacy, skipping over the fact that he's a clone with accelerated aging, living 20 years after the Clone Wars, with the implication that this commander would be roughly 50 to 60 years old. His experience in warfare would, at this point, be unrivaled, not just from his time spent during the Clone Wars, like in George's original timeline, but also here with the changes we've made for him now in ours. Since in the original story, Able 1707 wouldn't be rescued by Luke until after the original death of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Except now, in our timeline, let's just say that several stray rebels accidentally discovered him early. Striving further into the room in order to seek answers for his questions, Able wasn't the only one curious to know. The named legend of Jedi Master Obi-Wan was well told in the rebellion, but his death was only just now revealed. Bearing the brunt of this poor attempt at small talk, Luke remained seated with legs crossed and arms held inward. Not because the conversation before him was harsh or crude, but because it reminded him of the past. Still a Jedi in training and only here now, in order to uphold his trial of skill, Luke kept finding himself taken back to his dreams, waking dreams, visions and hallucinations from the Force. Only then and there would Abel finally speak loud enough and abound to finally catch the ear of this Jedi, promptly wasting no time to joke or gag, and instead stating that Alderaan would be reached within any moment. Something that instead of soothing the teen they were meant to, Luke only worried more, finally rising to his feet and catching his balance just in time as hyperspace was exited and the Millennium Falcon was put on red alert. Arriving not at Alderaan, but a field of debris and asteroids, nearly any other pilot in this scenario would have crashed the second they entered. Luckily for those in the rebellion on board, their pilot was one of the best, swerving and sweeping his vessel in great swaths to spend and spread the armada of crumbled rocks that nearly blockaded him. The sighted spotting of an adjacent moon gave him a stable destination to reach, all until a TIE fighter surged past him while Luke and the Able entered the cockpit, impressed by his flying, but concerned by what they saw, with the former telling them to flee and double-check their coordinates, while the latter encouraged battle. Han Solo himself would double down and state his desire to slay each and every Imperial witness to his actions, illegal or not. The following discovery of the Death Star and their capture would proceed just as it originally did, with the exception of their landing. No longer just a small crew, but here, in our timeline, an entire rebellion squad with a Jedi escort. Seeking cooperation instead of confrontation, Luke humbly asked those abound to listen and lean on him for their next mission, to follow him into the trooper-lined hangar bay before gripping the minds of his foes. Raising his hand quicker than the stormtroopers could shoot, he convinced them to give free passage, and more than that, a tour to the prison wing, splitting up and going their own ways, as Luke knew he alone would have to deactivate the tractor beam. It would only take so long before the Dark Lord, Darth Vader, became personally involved. Finding the dazed stormtroopers and harshly awakening them, knowing then and there that a Jedi was present, but unable to identify what he sensed. A presence in the Force was strong on this space station, one that he didn't know, and yet at the same time, so familiar. Unaware of the death of Master Obiwan Kenobi, and still convinced he was alive. Assumptions that inflated his rush to move. With the obvious fact that Darth Vader didn't learn about his daughter until mere moments before his own death, another fact that needs to be mentioned is that Leia wasn't Darth Vader's daughter when the novelization for Episode 4 was first written. This is why I personally consider the idea on a what if Darth Vader sensed Leia was his daughter to be the most basic Star Wars story, because realistically, it should have happened. The Dark Lord should have sensed the connection. If not at first, then their private interrogation should have revealed it. Skipping past this, the arrival of Abel and Han Solo upon Leia's cell and their escape would unfold without Luke in that room, leading towards their escape in the very same manner as they fled into the garbage bin. This allows us to finally address R2-D2 and C-3PO, who, with the former still holding the Death Star plans, there would be no reason or logic for this astromech to leave the Falcon, since in our timeline, their ship wasn't greeted by Darth Vader directly, only a handful of stormtrooper squads. What this means is no one would be able to survive the garbage trap, not until Luke himself felt another disturbance. Warned, worded, and told aloud of the danger that his new friends faced, but also the confrontation that he desperately desired. Told by the ghost of Obiwan Kenobi that Luke's father was here, aboard this very same space station, having already felt such a connection before, but denying it either through trepidation or intimidation. Time couldn't be spent to delay. Hastening fast to the very same room R2-D2 was employed in during George's timeline, freeing those who needed it before enacting his own attempt to follow. Sensations from the past finally caught up with Luke, freezing him nearest the hangar bay and watching as Abel and Han led their escape on board the Falcon. Confronted at first by 24 stormtroopers, all healed and regained from the previous mind trap of their Jedi foe, they themselves were swiftly doubled and then tripled. With Abel the first being to witness this ambush, he timed a well-placed shot to short-circuit the nearest door, but not all of them. Confronted now on both sides of the hangar bay, with Luke blockading one corner while he hurried to close off the other end. Thankful that thermal grenades were pointed and thrown. Such a designed outcome was too easy for this veteran to obtain, easily allowing most to board the Falcon, but not all, as Luke remained frozen, having ignited his lightsaber only when he was forced to. Could he leave right now? Could he board the spaceship behind him and flee into hyperspace? Could he save the rebellion just as he helped save the princess? Of course. And yet, he remained bound by blood, the chilled calls of the Force reaching his own spine, all until another lightsaber was ignited, trailed and traced by the mechanically enforced breath of Darth Vader, filled with curiosity, bewilderment, and denial. Who trained this Jedi? Where did he come from? How could he have killed so many stormtroopers? Or maybe it was someone else. All of these things raced through the mind of the Dark Lord that swiftly sought such an answer for each of them, leering forward with every step, except the confrontation that this Sith Lord was seeking came to an end before it even began, with Luke Skywalker himself promptly deactivating his blade before kneeling in meditation like Master Jin, calm and serene even now. And this is because of the training that Luke has already undertaken in our timeline. Taking a brief moment to address these changes, I want to clearly state aloud that Luke in our timeline will have no problem fatally striking in defense, much like how Master Jin would casually kill anyone who sought to attack him. I only mention this concept now because killing someone who's just doing their job is a massive change from Luke's original character, with the purest depiction of Luke Skywalker, in my opinion, being presented in the Shadows of Mendor, with iJedi showing a little bit of his regret, but not a lot. And while I will acknowledge Luke Skywalker and Ben Skywalker as depicted in Fate of the Jedi is absolutely perfect, the point is, this Skywalker, our Luke Skywalker, is already well grown past these doubts. Not a Jedi Knight, no, but still trained enough to realize the most sacred of Jedi texts and scripture. There was no death. There was only the Force. And through it, all life in the galaxy was bound and tied together as one living current. Notions that meant little to nothing for the Dark Lord, who ordered his own soldiers back before strolling forth with heavy steps, evading the panic-laced shots from Abel and Han Solo with the Force, and treating both of them with no thought at all. Only then and there would this being of darkness stand over the still quiet and solemn form of Luke, lost in meditation until the final moment. A moment when, after raising his gaze, eyes would seek and meet the tinted visor in front of him. Luke would then go on to say that he wasn't here to fight, only to speak. To speak not to the Dark Lord, but his father, formally stating for everyone around to hear that he was the son of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. Swiftly sensing the shift that such a statement earned through the Force, Luke reached out with a helpful hand and plea, begging his father to run away with him, to leave this life behind, and to abandon the dark side. All of which came to an end as Abel finally timed his blaster shots to hit the now distracted Dark Lord in his chest plate, spewing sparks and the instant response of 36 stormtroopers, all firing in return. Forced to leap and lunge, to pivot and roll, as the only thing that saved Luke was his nearly 2 decades of Jedi training, only with reluctance did he finally board the Falcon, with Abel fast behind him. Blasting themselves loose, as Han wasted no time for his newest guest to buckle, he leapt straight into hyperspace, blowing several attackers against the hangar walls while fire and plasma was singed and sheared. Promptly called a scruffy-looking nerf herder by the woman he helped save, Leia laughed at Luke while helping Abel to his feet, remarking that if he was a Jedi, she finally understood why they went extinct. From here, their arrival at Yavin 4 would proceed the same, with the sole exception of Jedi Padawan Ferris Olin, someone who narrowly survived the destruction of Alderaan and who was originally charged to protect Leia during her childhood. Keeping his backstory, his teenage struggle with Anakin, his brief and debatable fall to the dark side, all intact, our change will instead be his early arrival on Yavin 4, already on the planet when the Death Star plans are first brought down. And while the timing of Ferris joining the rebellion originally didn't occur until after the Battle of Yavin, here, in our timeline, instilled by the very words Leia spoke in the novel, except now much more earlier, he would join on the spot. Of course, this is just me trying to come up with an excuse for him to already know about the rebel base on Yavin 4. But again, Ferris Olin was the Jedi Guardian of Leia throughout her entire childhood. So if anyone is tracking her down, it's him. While we are focused on Ferris, I want to address all the help given to him originally by Obi-Wan Kenobi, something that obviously can't happen in our timeline. Because of this, going forward in this story, we'll be using the assumption that all that help was still given, but as a forced ghost. With Ferris important enough in George's original timeline for the spirit of Master Jin to personally plead for Obi-Wan to save him, we must also assume that in this story, he is important enough for these ghosts to commune with him. Needless to say, the escorted appearance of Leia alongside 2 Jedi bodyguards would be a blast from the past for Jan Dodonna, once a veteran of the Clone Wars and best friends with Jedi Master Plo Koon. Not only would these 2 outwardly presenting Jedi be a boon towards the morale of this ever-aging and frail man, so too were the young and unexperienced happy to have them, never seeing the Force, but knowing well the stories. All of this allows us to jump further ahead until this specific panel, with the stated fact that Ferris Olin would also be piloting an X-Wing. We as fans can only imagine how much of a change this inclusion would entail before their grouped escape. This, coupled with the reappearance of Han Solo, just as he normally did, would lead Ferris to obtain the same medal as his 3 co-hosts. With everyone in every corner of the rebellion singing songs not just about victory, but the return of the Jedi. Assuming Luke would be able to sleep instead of going out later that night for a joyride, even if he did, his training would have won him the battle without any effort. And I personally believe the inclusion of Ferris Olin so early would make Rebellion security much more stable anyway. So secure that when Leia is arrested and turned over to the Empire after attempting to mourn her lost planet, Luke and Ferris would save the day, killing the Imperial assassin X7 without ever revealing his true identity and preventing him from ever injecting Leia with truth serum. This means that not only would the assassination attempt on Luke never take place, but he also wouldn't have to go back into hiding on Tatooine. And despite this, even though X7 is already dead, Luke's future mission over Kamino would still occur. So too would the discovery of Lune Devivian, except here, in our timeline, his Force sensitivity will be treated much more seriously, enough for Luke and Ferris to take him back with them as their prisoner, assuming Razi Seresh is killed with ease because, well, they're 2 fully trained Jedi Padawans. When each of these Jedi were alone with the other, when their twin thoughts turned to meditation, they both asked their spiritual teachers the same question: what to do with Lune? Except Ferris himself already knew the answer before it was given, since he was also the very same Jedi that discovered Lune in the first place before his eventual assignment upon the Jedi asteroid and its own destruction by Darth Vader. Lune Divian must be redeemed. He must finish his training, and the only way to do this was for Ferris to formally be named as a Jedi Knight, casually glossing over something deemed sacred during the Old Order. Time was too short now to delay. These battles and rescues would of course reach the ear of the only being that Darth Vader held to fear, yet followed, his own Dark Master, the ruler of the galaxy, and someone who grinned at the freshly learned name of Luke Skywalker, spoken openly with hope as the rebellion dreamed of the future.